With Impact Wrestling announcing that they are officially going back to the TNA branding, I thought now would be the perfect time for a follow-up episode on the history of Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. But this time, we're going to be taking a look at the last several years, and we're going to see how they really made an impact. Because today... Thank you to all the wonderful supporters out there who support me over on Patreon, like True Sinister and The Reflection of Perfection. To find out how to get your own Patreon shoutout, please go over and check out my Patreon page. With the Impact era officially coming to a close, I thought now would be the perfect time to examine the highs, the lows, and how exactly is this company still in business? And to do that, let's go back to the beginning. And by the beginning, I mean let's go to the end of TNA. Well, at least it was for the time being. In autumn of 2016, it seemed like everything was coming to a close for Total Nonstop Action Wrestling. Billy Corgan, the former frontman for Smashing Pumpkins and the recently appointed president of TNA, was now suing the company over unpaid debt, which he had claimed that TNA had defaulted on. And on top of that, the state of Tennessee had put a lien on the promotion for unpaid taxes. And all this was taking place right after mainstays such as AJ Styles, Kurt Angle, and Sting all left the promotion, as well as TNA's main television program, Impact Wrestling, no longer being on Spike TV. However, there was one major saving grace. While TNA was no longer on Spike, in Canada they were airing on the Fight Network, which just happened to be owned by a parent company named Anthem Sports and Entertainment, who made an offer to take on some of the debt and offer financial assistance in order to keep TNA running. But then on Halloween, Billy Corgan lost his injunction that kept TNA from selling the company, although it was ruled that they had to pay back the money Dixie borrowed from Corgan the next day. Now, along with this came the possibility that one of the minority owners could pay Corgan back, and this would result in them being the majority shareholder of TNA. And that's exactly what happened, with Anthem Sports and Entertainment forming a credit facility in order to fund the operations for Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, and Corgan was effectively removed as president. But on November 3rd, Corgan stated that he had still not been repaid the money, resulting in him considering legal action, as well as pondering turning the debt into a 36% stake in the promotion. But following the settlement, Anthem would end up acquiring the loans, and thus, Anthem Sports and Entertainment would purchase the majority of Total Nonstop Action Wrestling and become TNA's new parent company. Dixie Carter would retain 5% in a minority stake and would also resign as chairwoman, and instead became a part of Fight Media Group's advisory board. More restructuring followed as TNA Entertainment, the parent company of Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, the promotion, would go through several name changes. First, Impact Ventures, and then to Anthem Wrestling Exhibitions, LLC. And as such, Anthem's executive vice president, Ed Nordholm, would become the president of the new company. And then on January 5th, 2017, Jeff Jarrett would be brought back, serving as a consultant. And Anthem would rebrand the promotion to Impact Wrestling, naming it after their primary television program. Then later on in the year, an Impact would attempt a merger with Jeff Jarrett's new promotion Global Force Wrestling, resulting in yet another rebrand, planning on taking the Global Force name in June. However, this didn't last for very long, as by that September, after an incident where Jeff Jarrett was reportedly a bit out of sorts, Anthem would decide to cut ties with Double J, as well as severing the plans for Global Force Wrestling as well. Well, mostly. Because despite Jarrett being out, they would still use the tape library from Global Force, and they would name their new streaming service the Global Wrestling Network, even though Jeff Jarrett still owned the rights to GFW. This resulted in the following year, Jeff Jarrett filing a lawsuit against Impact Wrestling and Anthem Sports and Entertainment over copyright infringement. Although in 2020, this would result in a mistrial. The two sides would agree to settle in January of 2021. And all that was just the first year. Yeah, well, I bet some of you might have forgotten about that whole Global Force thing. So you see, Impact changing names really isn't that big of a deal. Anyway, year 2 would start off very differently, and it would start with two very important individuals to the company. 2018 started with Don Callis and Scott D'Amore becoming executive vice presidents, and right from the start, the company went back to using the traditional square ring, a move that the company and many fans go back and forth on. Additionally, they would also join the live streaming bandwagon, as they hitched up with the platform Twitch, co-promoting a show called Brace for Impact that was a joint venture with WrestlePro, and their first live event would feature Impact Wrestling going against Lucha Underground. And now, if you're curious about the history of Lucha Underground, well, I already covered that in a previous episode, which I will leave a link to, so stick around after the video. Anyway, 2018 was an important year, and under Scott D'Amore and Don Callis, it seemed that things were going in a better direction, at least better than it had been. At the start of 2019, Impact would move to the Pursuit channel, and it would also announce that the former WWE developmental territory and also the former TNA developmental territory, Ohio Valley Wrestling, would serve as their training grounds yet again. Then, later on in the year, a change that was well overdue, Impact's official streaming app would be Impact Plus, replacing that of the Global Wrestling Network. It was about time. And then Impact found its home on Anthem's own Access TV, where it can still be found even today. Now, I know there are some fans out there who for some reason really just love drawing comparisons between WCW and TNA. However, one of the more obvious ones that I think a lot of people tend to overlook is that this serves as a perfect example of what WCW could have been and how they could have stayed afloat. With Impact Wrestling being owned by a media company that has its own cable television channel, well, it does give them a cushion that a lot of other wrestling promotions don't have. Not even WWE. And while under this plan you really can't afford to fly too close to the sun, at least you know you always have a safety net there. Now, on the other hand, one way that Impact Wrestling differs from World Championship Wrestling is while that there are some people out there who say that WCW held onto their stars for far too long, well, Impact had kind of the opposite problem. 4 years now, even before the switch over to Impact Wrestling, the promotion had a hard time keeping somebody as the face of their company, with most of their biggest names since 2016 all leaving the promotion within 2 years of winning the Impact Championship. Drew McIntyre, or as he was known back then as Drew Galloway, first won the Impact Championship on March 15, 2016. Less than a year later, on February 26, 2017, despite having an amazing anti-WWE promo, he would announce that he and TNA had parted ways. Eli Drake, now known as LA Knight, would win the Impact Championship on August 17, 2017. But then, after refusing to work against Tessa Blanchard and making a few statements about Impact's booking, he would be fired through an email on April 7th, officially becoming a free agent later that June. But probably the most egregious of all was Austin Aries, who upon his return to Impact was being built up as a major star, feuding with Pentagon Jr. But all this would ultimately result in Austin Aries no-selling the finish of his match against Johnny Impact, where Johnny would be winning the title. After the count of 3, Aries would instantly get up, flipping off the crowd on his way back to the locker room. Oh, and by the way, Pentagon Jr., Johnny Impact, and Brian Cage would all also leave the once and future TNA as well, with many of them finding a home in Impact's new competition of AEW. And with how rough 2020 would be on the industry, Impact Wrestling really had no choice but to figure if they can't beat them, join them. But before they went ahead with that, they did have one more play up their sleeve. In a move that was considered to be highly controversial, Tessa Blanchard would become the first woman ever to win the Impact World Championship. That's right, not the Knockouts title, but the Impact belt itself. The same title that has the same lineage starting all the way at Kurt Angle down to AJ Styles and so on. This move was considered to be rather polarizing, with some feeling that this was a total disgrace, and others viewing it that this is the only way that the former TNA, pun intended, could make an impact, while also simultaneously offering Tessa Blanchard something that no other promotion would give her, as at the time her popularity was growing amongst the IWC. So despite her backstage reputation, it was seen that the possibility of pushing her to the moon could be a great move to help get more eyes on the product, and they wanted to make sure she didn't go somewhere else. But this plan would backfire. Amidst everything going on in the world in 2020, Tessa Blanchard found herself unable to return to the United States, instead staying in Mexico with her now husband and the Impact World Championship, leaving the promotion without their top prize. They pleaded to her to send the belt back, but to no avail. This resulted in Moose bringing back the old TNA belt. Tessa would eventually return the Impact World Championship title belt, and amid some controversy backstage, her and Impact Wrestling would also go their separate ways. But by then, some would say that the damage had already been done, with, as previously mentioned, Eli Drake already leaving the company, as well as the reputations of Brian Cage and Sami Callihan both changing in the eyes of some as the result of feuding with Tessa. And there are also those out there who don't feel that any of this damaged anybody's careers in the slightest. And there are also those out there who applaud Impact Wrestling for making such a progressive decision. And not to mention that there are other fans out there who feel that by giving Tessa the Impact Championship, well, it really undermined that of the Knockouts division. decision. Anyway, regardless as to how you feel about this, there are two things to note. One, it really couldn't have come at a worse time for Impact Wrestling. But at the same time, it did keep hardcore wrestling fans talking. And there are those out there who would say that regardless as to whether it's good or bad, just by staying on the lips of your target audience will keep you relevant enough to stay in the game. It makes people think to themselves, hey, I haven't checked them out in a while, maybe I should give them a shot. And regardless as to how any of you personally feel about any of these decisions, it's still the strategy that Impact Wrestling has been employing this entire time, and it does appear to be working, especially considering where their other 2002 contemporaries, Ring of Honor and Jakar, have wound up. Although, in between the Tessa play and the TNA rebranding, there was one other move that happened right in the middle, and it was a move that seemed to have divided fans just as much. Impact thought that their best chances at survival, especially during this time, was to hitch themselves onto a bigger promotion. That of AEW, even though many would argue that it's AEW's existence itself that has dramatically shortchanged that of Impact. Whatever the case, the two would collaborate for a period of time, with Kenny Omega eventually becoming the belt collector holding on to both the TNA and Impact straps, as well as main eventing an Impact pay-per-view against Rich Swann, with the story that all tied together with Don Callis' real-life friendship with Kenny Omega. However, when it was all said and done, not everybody felt that this was the best move for Impact. Even though the pay-per-view was a major success, at least comparatively speaking for Impact at the time, there were still many who would say that All Elite got the better end of the deal, and that Don Callis pretty much exploited his own promotion in order to get in good with AEW. But again, there are two sides to this, because there are others who would say that this helped to put a lot of eyes on Impact that normally wouldn't be watching, and allowed the company to stay on the radar during a very tough time. Although, we shouldn't forget that Impact Wrestling had other crossover promotion too. While once upon a time, WWE was considered the enemy that they were trying to take down in the new Monday Night Wars, about a decade later, and their attitudes seem to have softened, with Impact Wrestling's then women's champion Mickie James making an appearance in the WWE's Women's Royal Rumble, and with WWE's poster child The Rock getting to appear for TNA's Hall of Fame induction of Ken Shamrock. And maybe, just maybe, this shift in perspective was exactly what the company needed all along. Instead of trying to outdo Vince McMahon, over the past couple of years it seems like they were doing what TNA set out to do in the first place, and that's just doing the best job they possibly can with what they have. And overall, this really does seem to be working for them. And while they would have minor stars temporarily stop through, they also found their footing with two stars that stayed loyal to the brand, the aforementioned Moose as well as Josh Alexander. Furthermore, they relied on simple, sensible booking. While it may not have been perfect, they ran cost-effective shows and didn't overextend themselves. And so despite low ratings and low pay-per-view buys, they've earned their reputation as the little company that could, the company that just keeps on surviving. However, they're no longer trying to compete with the likes of WWE. Instead, they're perfectly content just carving out their own little niche in the greater wrestling landscape. And now, with the imminent rebirth of the TNA brand, we see that the company that is currently known as Impact Wrestling might just have its best days in front of them, as this has been the promotion that was never stopping, never stalling, and just kept on going, because it is, always was, and soon will be once again, total non-stop action wrestling. And that's exactly how you make an impact. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and be subscribed, and let me know what your favorite memories are from the Impact era of TNA. Thanks again to you and to all my amazing Patreon supporters, and as always, Dave knows.